Let me be straight from the start. If you've come for the donuts, I'm going to disappoint. They are only virtual. But if you've come for the future of business and even the future of cities, you're in the right place. So, I want to introduce you to the only donut in the world that's actually going to turn out to be good for us. Here it is. Imagine humanity's use of resources radiating out from the middle of this picture. So that hole in the middle is a place where people worldwide are left falling short on the essentials of life, without the food, healthcare, education, housing, political voice, energy that every person has a claim to lead a life of dignity, opportunity, and community. We want to get everybody out of the donut's hole into that green donut itself. But, it's a big but, we cannot afford to overshoot that outer ring, the ecological ceiling, because there we put so much pressure on this extraordinary, unique, delicately balanced living planet that is our home, that we begin to kick her out of balance. We cause climate breakdown. We acidify the oceans, create a hole in the ozone layer, catastrophic levels of biodiversity loss. And these 9 planetary boundaries around the outside are what Earth system scientists around a decade ago believed are the 9 critical life-supporting systems that make Earth such a home sweet home for humanity. So I propose to you this is a compass for the 21st century to meet the needs of all people within the means of the planet. But if it's a compass, you want to know where we are now. And that's not an easy picture to look at. All that red in the middle shows the extent to which humanity is falling short on the essentials of life. See at the top, food. 11% of people in the world don't have enough food to eat every day. So that red wedge goes 11% of the way to the middle of the picture. On water, 9% of people don't have access to clean water. 1 person in 3 doesn't have access to what we call a toilet. But you can see on every one of those dimensions, there are millions or billions of people falling short. And yet we have already overshot at least 4 of these planetary boundaries. On climate change, on excessive fertilizer use, on too much converting land surface for human use, and on critical biodiversity loss. So this is the state of humanity in our planetary home. And for we, the people of the early 21st century, this is our selfie. None of last century's economists, politicians, or the future is calling. The future's already seen that selfie and wants to change today's business models, politics, and economic theories, because no one from the last century saw this. We have to come up with designs of our own that are fit for our times, because we're the first generation to realize this is the challenge we face. And it's our legacy to our children's children to turn this story around. I've presented this diagram to many communities over the last 5 years, and for me, one of the most fascinating conversations I have is with business. Imagine if every company in the world drew up its corporate strategy seated at this table, asking itself, does the way we do business help bring humanity into this space? Or, let's be honest, does the way we do business actually push humanity out of this space? Because that's basically how 20th century business was designed. And I believe if we are going to create businesses that actually help bring humanity into the donut, that meet the needs of all people within the means of the planet, we need to put at the heart of business 2 design principles. Businesses that are regenerative and distributive by design. I want to tell you a bit about each of those. So, distributive by design, what do I mean? Businesses that are designed to share value created far more equitably with all who help co-create it, moving from that centralized design to distributive. I'll give you some examples of businesses that are starting to actually put this in practice. So, rather than have corporate ownership where enterprise is owned by shareholders who never actually step inside the enterprise, we're seeing a resurgence of employee ownership, of cooperative ownership, where the workers themselves own the enterprise, whether it's John Lewis or in cooperatives and small-scale employee-owned companies rising up around the world. This is resurgent, fascinating change in the ownership of business. But also companies that commit to paying fair taxes, like Lush has taken on the fair tax mark, saying we commit that we recognize private business does not create its own wealth. It is invested in the base of society and in public investments, and we need to give back to the social base from which we build our business. Many people today may have drunk a cup of coffee that came from Ethiopia, and we're all used to pictures of workers far down the supply chain growing those beans, but usually the beans leave the country and then most of the value gets added in Europe, in America, in Australia. Moye Coffee is an enterprise that wants to distribute far more of the value of your cup of coffee back towards those who actually grow the coffee. So instead of just growing the coffee in Ethiopia, they are now also roasting it there, creating the infrastructure that captures more of the value, in fact, 2/3 of the value in the country of origin. That is a far more distributive way of designing coffee for the future. And this picture may look like a rock concert. Actually, it's a software developers concert for Drupal, which is an open source software for designing websites. Any major corporation would be desperately envious of the passion and size of this R&D team of people who get together once a year and create and patch and innovate the software that they collectively share. They're holding their fingers up like this to say, I may be just one drop. But look what happens when we put our minds together. So these are some of the ideas, just some illustrations of the possibility of distributive design, which is coming up in new kinds of business. What about regenerative design? Through the middle of this diagram is the degenerative linear 20th century economy. We take Earth's materials, make it into stuff we want, use it for a while, and then throw it away. And that pushes us over planetary boundaries. So we need to bend those arrows around so that resources aren't used up, they're used again and again, creating economies that run on sunlight, wind, and waves. Let me give you some examples of enterprises that are trying to work with and within these cycles of the living world. In the slums of Kenya is one of the places where there were no toilets, but now there are, because the enterprise Sanergy has created a micro-franchise of toilets throughout the community, so that for the first time in their lives, people can use a toilet with soap, clean water, and toilet paper. That brings dignity. It also brings health, and it creates enterprise through the community. The waste is collected every day and turned into fertilizer, sold back to farmers. So at the technical level, they're closing the loop of nutrient use. But at the social level, they are distributing opportunity and value throughout the community. If you were to buy a car from a company called Open Motors, it arrives looking like this, like a wardrobe from IKEA. And good luck if you know how to put it together. They say you can in under an hour. But if you don't know how to put it together, the good news is you can take it to somebody who does, because this car is open source by design. The hardware and how to connect it is free and available for anybody to see on the internet. So anyone in the world can set up to be an assembler, a distributor, a repairer, a refurbisher, a customizer of an Open Motors car. And once this chassis is assembled, then you can create a design like this or a design like this. You can build different kinds of designs on top of this 100% electric, 100% modular electric car. I live in Oxford, and at the end of my street is the place where all the mini cars in the world are shipped out, full of air, and shipped around the world. And I think the future of cars and of transport is like this, modular, and not even just cars and transport, industry. Ship the parts, assemble them, reassemble them, refurbish them, customize them locally. This is 21st century distributed manufacturing. And this company is called Houdini. They make sportswear in Sweden. And they're trying to ensure that all of their clothing is made either from organic fibers like wool and tencel, so they can be decomposed and used again and again. In fact, they put some of their wool clothing in a bin, turned it into compost, grew mushrooms on top, and served it to their customers and said, you're eating your old ski wear, to show that loop going round. Or they make it from recycled nylon and recycled polyester. And Houdini have actually released, the first company to release an assessment of all the textiles they use, assessing them against the planetary boundaries and against the social foundation. So they have done a donut assessment of their company, their impact. They're pioneers because they are trying to create a circular economy. But what I want to argue is that business alone cannot do this. And let me show you. I never travel without hose pipes. So here we are. Here's the linear degenerative 20th century economy, right? Take Earth's materials, stuff them in the pipe, make them into stuff we want, and throw the waste away. And we need to bend that loop around so that the loop is closed. Imagine this is a Houdini sportswear top. This lady looks like she's wearing a Houdini top. Can you just hold that? There we are. So send your clothes back to us and we will close the loop. But then maybe Marks and Spencer's or Zara or French Connection or H&M say, well, send your clothes back to us and we'll close the loop as well. So could you hold that? There we are. Now I want every one of you in this room to imagine that the clothing on your back, whichever company it's made by, that company says, send the clothes back to us, make a loop above your head. Yes, really, make a loop above your head. Exactly, so that every company has its own little loop and is sending the clothing back. Oh, you look fantastic. You see, you look wonderful, but nature would laugh at us. Because nature doesn't turn a daffodil back into a daffodil and a peacock into a peacock. Nature creates an ecosystem of resource reuse. Nature breaks the building blocks back down to the basics of life and recreates again and again. No one company alone can create an ecosystem of textile reuse, of metals reuse, of minerals, of ceramics, of plastics. We need to create ecosystems, and that means we need intervention above what any one company alone can do. So how are we going to get there? You see, we have the risk in trying to create a circular economy that we ended up with this segmented circularity that you all just did, where we have the material flowing in closed loops, returning to the brand. The resources are owned and controlled. The standards, they're mine. You can't connect with my standards. The governance is in-house. The technology is proprietary. I'm not telling you how I made that. What we need is ecosystem circularity, where the materials flow in nested loops. They return not to the brand, but to the ecosystem. The standards are open and shared, so they connect. It's network-wide governance, and the knowledge of how it's done is in the commons. How do we get there? Well, I think cities and governments play a hugely important role to create the space possible. We need city-wide planning. Here's a plan being drawn up in Glasgow to look at the possible loops of an ecosystem in the food sector between meat, beer, and bread. I don't know if that tells you something about the Glaswegian diet. But look at all the connections that are being built there. No one company alone can make that happen. We need public procurement. I was delighted to be in the Netherlands last week, traveling on a train with the woman who is responsible for getting Dutch state railways to be 100% powered by wind. What if in every country the government committed to ensure that all public institutions, public transport, were powered by renewable energy? That would transform the energy system and create a dynamic that brings us way faster down the cost curve of renewable energy. Public provisioning, it's fantastic that in cities like London and Bristol and Oxford around the UK, public water fountains are coming back to get the plastic bottles away so we don't have to recycle them because we just don't use them in the first place. And we need more community initiatives where we create space for people, like in this repair cafe. Communities get together and repair and refurbish and reuse goods without disposing of them. These are just a few ways that we can create nested circularity, not that segmented circularity that will never work. What about the future of networks? Of course, we've got lots of people here talking today about the dangers of the networks that we hoped would be open and shared, but actually we've got corporate networks, whether it's Alphabet, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft. They, of course, have created networks that are taken up because of their size, because of the power. They are designed for finance reasons. They're not designed to work for us. They're designed to capture our attention for advertising. Their governance is proprietary. The data is captured by those networks. And the user, well, we're just seen as a consumer. Of course, there is a completely different way these networks can evolve. Open source community networks like Gebeed Online in Amsterdam, like Linux, they're taken up because they're fit for purpose, because of the way they're designed. And they're designed to work for the communities. They're driven by the community of users. Their governance is free and open source. And their data, rather than being captured, is sovereign to the individual, or data about the commons belongs in the commons. And the user, of course, becomes the co-creator of that system. So how on earth can we go from the internet that we have to this kind of internet that we actually want, community-based networks? Many changes need to happen. I'm just going to draw attention to a few small ones that any city can already do now. First of all, recognize the commons. We are not just rational economic man, as 20th century economics taught us, as either labor or consumer. We are creators, sharers, collaborators. We care, we steward, we neighbor. We have multiple identities. And once you recognize the commons, you can start to create spaces for the commons. You may be familiar with the amazing work that Jeanette Sadiq Khan has done in New York, opening up public spaces where people can actually physically meet, not just in outdoor spaces, but also within old buildings. Those the deserted public high streets create spaces where commoners can meet and begin to create nodes of this community-based network. Become an open digital city. I know Francesca Bria is here talking about what's going on in Barcelona. How can the city adopt these technologies that actually take away from the corporate control and open it up to citizen control. And lastly, empower community networks as they emerge. Gebeet Online, which means area online in Amsterdam, is popping up. It's like a Facebook, except it's created for and by the local community, designed for their needs, owned by them as a cooperative. And the city empowered that. These are some ways that we can begin to create a very different future of digital networks from the one that we seem to be heading towards. So, can business do the donut? Yes, but not alone. We need ecosystems of material reuse and of digital design that actually make something bigger than any individual business possible. But I want to talk, finally, let me just go back there, because when I meet companies, some companies, and they see this donut, they say, it's a sad story, you know, but the business of business is business. And everything we're doing is nearly legal, so we're just going to keep going until somebody catches us. And then other companies I meet, other enterprises, they say, this diagram, this is why we created our enterprise. We created an enterprise in order to sequester carbon, in order to improve health, bring water access to this community, in order to empower women. This is why we're in business. And these incredibly different responses fascinate me. And I think the reason for such different responses is because we are living in the middle of an incredible psychological drama about what business is for, what it can do and be in the world. And in the simplest of terms, I think we're leaving the extractive era, the 20th century extractive enterprise design, where business was designed to ask one overriding question that underpinned every conversation. How much financial value can we extract from the way we design this enterprise? But when I talk to what I think of 21st century enterprise designers, those Moye Coffee, when I talk to urban designers, Sanergy toilets, Open Motors cars, they are coming from a completely different place. How many benefits can we layer into the way we design this enterprise? Benefits for the community, for culture, for the living world, ensuring that we make enough profit that we can open the doors next week, next month, next year. Totally different starting point. What is it about the internal design of an enterprise that leaves it in one place or the other? And here I'm going to turn to the work of Marjorie Kelly, who's a brilliant corporate analyst. She identifies 5 design traits. And if any kind of organization or enterprise that you're involved in, I invite you to question it through these 5 lenses. First, what is the purpose of this enterprise or this organization? The purpose of a pretty mainstream car company might be, well, we want to be the biggest market share of 4x4 vehicles in Europe, for example, or in the world. Open Motors ask them their purpose. Their purpose is to democratize mobility. The purpose of Sanergy toilets? Well, it's a safe and prosperous Kenya. Their purpose is far bigger than themselves, and they are merely contributing towards it. What about governance? What kind of principles govern the way companies talk on Monday morning? What metrics are staff asked to report against? Is it the tight market metrics? What's this week's market share? What's your profits? What's your sales? Because if that's not growing, you're under pressure. Or is it a longer-term metrics about our reduction of carbon use, our reduction of water use, our transformation of our relationship to the suppliers and the community? What about the networks? How are companies networked with their suppliers, with their customers, with their allies? Maybe they'd see them as their competitors, but perhaps they're their allies in transformation, because networks determine what any one company can do bigger than itself alone. And now we're going to the deep stuff. I've put the most powerful stuff deepest, like in psychotherapy. The powerful stuff lies deepest. So how is the company owned? Because whether a company is owned by its employees, by its customers, by a family, by private equity, or by shareholders, these different designs of ownership deeply determine the quality of finance that it attracts, and whether that finance is saying, yeah, but how much financial value can we extract in the next quarter? Or whether that finance is saying, we're here with you for long-term social, environmental return with a fair financial return. And of course, as anyone knows who's involved in enterprise, that pretty much shapes everything. I think we are at a moment, actually, of split identity in many companies, where they may be changing their purpose, their governance, their networks, and it sounds great on paper, but so many are still owned either by the shareholders, by the stock market, or by venture capital, which pulls them back in a very extractive model. And if looking at this slide makes you feel inside, I feel your pain. It's a very 21st century pain, because I think we are going through this psychological drama, and it's very difficult to live with day by day when you are caught in that. What, of course, needs to happen is that all those arrows point in one direction. which to me means we need to see transformation in models of business ownership so that the way companies are owned and the way they're financed can actually be aligned with generative purpose, with the purpose of enterprise being to regenerate this living planet that we are destroying, to regenerate communities that have been fragmented. And that, for me, is the purpose of what 21st century business can be and can do. If you're interested in these ideas and you want to know what it would mean to think like a 21st century economist, you're welcome to watch these 1-minute animations that I've had the privilege of working with brilliant stop motion workers. As you can see, they're silly, playful, funny, because economics has to become fun if we're going to widen the conversation. And please join this discussion group online if you want to be part of that. But I leave you with the one donut that turns out to be good for us. Because if this could be our compass in business, in economics, in government, and in economic theory, we really could turn around the story of where we're heading. Thank you very much.